Thousands of people die each week all across the world, but many of their deaths have an explanation. The next three cases will dive into people that have died and their death has no explanation and no answers to this day. How did they die? Were they murdered or did they commit suicide? Were their deaths accidental? Or does someone out there know what happened? Number 3, the Jamison family. The Jamison family consisted of Bobby Dale aged 44, Sherilyn aged 40 and their 6-year-old daughter called Madison Stormy Starr, who all lived in Eufaula in Oklahoma. They all went missing on the 8th of October 2009 after they had gone to view a 40-acre plot of land in the woods that they were interested in buying. They planned to live in a storage container on this plot of land. The storage container they already owned and would transport to the plot of land once they purchased the land. That day, on the 8th, they were last seen by a man who lived in the mountains there. It soon became clear that all 3 members of the family were missing, and the next day, over 300 volunteers and the authorities performed an air and ground search of the woods where they had gone to view the plot of land, but nothing was found, so the search was called off. 8 days later, their truck was found abandoned in an isolated part of the woods, and inside the truck was Bobby's cell phone, which had a picture of Madison taken the day before they went missing, and also in the truck was Bobby's wallet, Sherilyn's purse, their jackets, a GPS and $32,000 in cash inside a bag under the driver's seat. Their pet dog, Maisie, was inside the truck, malnourished but alive. Investigators noted that there was no evidence a struggle had taken place based on the condition of the abandoned truck. It wasn't until 4 years later, on the 16th of November 2013, that deer hunters found the skeletal remains of 3 bodies less than 3 miles from where the Jamisons' truck was found abandoned 4 years before. The skeletal remains were taken in and later identified as the Jamisons. Due to the skeletal remains being incomplete, what was found was badly decomposed and only consisted of skulls and bone fragments. A cause and manner of death could not be determined, although evidence of posthumous damage from animals were found. The coroner said the deaths were under suspicious circumstances. Bobby's skull was found to have a small hole on it, which has been believed to be from a bullet, although police have said they don't think the hole was from a bullet. What investigators uncovered creeped a lot of people out. When reviewing the security footage from the Jamisons' home in Eufaula, it showed that the day that had left their house, Bobby and Sherilyn were filmed walking several times in complete silence from their house to their truck, packing their belongings into their truck. They were walking in a trance state and would stop often and stand and stare at each other in silence. In the footage, Sherilyn was also filmed putting a brown briefcase into her truck. That brown briefcase and her .22 caliber handgun were never found and are both still missing to this day. When looking into how the Jamisons had $32,000 in cash inside their truck, investigators couldn't explain how they had that much money, as both Bobby and Sherilyn were unemployed and were receiving disability benefits, as Bobby was in a car accident one time and Sherilyn had issues too. Their friends and family were unable to explain how they had that much money, and no one knew why or where the money had come from. The sheriff commented on the fact the family seemed to be obsessed with death. Investigators uncovered an 11-page long letter written by Sherilyn to Bobby saying she wanted to divorce him, saying other hateful things, and that he was a hermit. Investigators uncovered another letter in their home talking about death. A friend of theirs eventually got a call, after she had been interviewed on a documentary, from a woman who claimed that she was part of a white supremacist cult, and that this cult had a hit list of people in a book, and that she would sometimes remember the names on the list, go home and look the names up online, and would find that most of them were missing people, and she remembered that Sherilyn's name was on the list. This woman was never identified. In the Jamisons' home was a witch Bible, and their pastor, Gary, claimed that Bobby had told him he was reading a satanic Bible, and Bobby had also told his pastor, Gary, that he had 4 ghosts in his home, and once asked Gary if he had special bullets that could be used to shoot ghosts. The storage container, that was still on their current property, was found with odd graffiti on it, saying 3 cats killed today by people in this area. Witches don't like their black cats killed. Another thing to note was how scared Bobby was of his 67-year-old dad, Bob Dean Jamison. Bobby had filed for a protective order against his dad 6 months before he had gone missing, saying his dad had threatened to kill him, his wife and their daughter in November 2008 and April 2009, and claimed his dad had hit him with his car on the 1st of November 2008, and wrote his dad was an extremely dangerous man who thinks he is above the law, and that they were scared for their lives and constantly living in fear. The judge in charge of the case dismissed the protective order in May 2009. Bobby's uncle and Bob Dean Jamison's brother, Jack Jamison, said his brother was a disturbed man but would never be able to have committed this much of a crime. The case of the Jamisons and their deaths are still unsolved. Number 2, Lisanne Freun and Chris Kremers. Chris Kremers and Lisanne Freun were 2 Dutch girls from the Netherlands who lived together in the same dorm room in Amersfoort and worked together at the same restaurant, where they saved their money up for 6 months with plans to travel to Panama together so they could learn Spanish and do volunteering. They flew into Panama on the 15th of March 2014, where they spent the next 2 weeks traveling before arriving in Boquete on the 29th of March. In Boquete, they stayed for a month with a local family and spent their time volunteering with children. On the 1st of April, they were seen eating brunch with 2 Dutch men before they left to begin their hike on the Pianista Trail. Their daily texts to their parents suddenly stopped after they started their hike. The next day, the 2nd of April, both Chris and Lisanne failed to turn up to an appointment they had with a tour guide. Still missing, their parents traveled to Panama on the 6th of April, and a search started in the forest for the next 10 days. Police dogs and detectives from the Netherlands were also involved in the search, but nothing was found. 10 weeks after their disappearance, Lisanne Freun's backpack was found next to a riverbank by the village of Alto Romero, 15 kilometers from where they went missing. Inside her backpack was 2 sunglasses, $83 in cash, Lisanne's passport, a water bottle, Lisanne's camera, 2 bras, and both of their phones in a good working condition. The woman who found the backpack said she had been in that same spot the day before and no backpack was there the day before, and although the backpack had been found next to a riverbed, the backpack was completely dry and all the items inside it were dry, and the camera and phones had no water damage. Detectives looked through the phones and noticed their phones had placed 112 calls to emergency services 6 hours after their hike had began. Lisanne's battery ran out at 5 a.m. on the 4th of April. Chris's phone didn't make any more calls but was repeatedly turned on and off between the 5th and the 11th of April, but every time it was turned on, the passcode was always entered wrong. The correct PIN was never entered into her phone. Her phone was turned on the 11th of April at 10:51 a.m. and turned off for the last time at 11:56 a.m. Lisanne's camera was looked at by detectives who found that on the 8th of April between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., 90 flash photos were taken deep in the jungle in complete darkness. Some of the pictures showed a twig with plastic bags on a rock, and another picture was of a backpack strap and a mirror on a rock, and there was another picture of the back of Chris's head. A picture taken on that camera, on the 8th of April, named only as picture number 509, was deleted. What is creepy about this picture being deleted is that when a picture is deleted from this camera itself, it can be restored, but if a picture was deleted through a computer connected to the camera, it is impossible to restore that picture. When investigators went to restore the picture, they found it couldn't be restored, meaning someone had to have manually deleted picture 509 from a computer. Because of where the backpack had been found, searches started along the Killabur River. While searching here, searchers found Chris's denim shorts on top of a rock only a few kilometers from where Lisanne's backpack was found. 2 months after this, close to where Lisanne's backpack had been found, a boot was found with a human foot inside of it, and 33 bones including a pelvic bone was found scattered widely across that riverbank. The bones were DNA tested and found to belong to Chris Kramers and Lisanne Freund. Creepily, when the bones were examined, Lisanne's bones still had some skin attached to them, but after forensic testing on Chris's bones, this showed her bones had been bleached and were extremely white and clean. Further testing showed that her bones didn't get that way by natural causes, so they concluded they might have been chemically cleaned with bleach. Both of their bones were examined under a microscope by a forensic anthropologist who noticed that the bones had no marks, cuts or scratches, nothing at all, and were unusually clean and clear. Chris Kramers' only half pelvic bone was found, also bleached. A pelvic bone decaying under natural decomposition could never break in half, and the pelvic bone could not be broken in half by animals. With natural decomposition, the joint tissue for the pelvic bone always remains intact and together during natural decomposition for years, but her joint tissue for the half of her pelvic bone was missing. The boot with a foot inside of it was found to be Lisanne's foot. The foot was found to have been severed with a clean cut, and the boot was still tied around the foot. Lastly, more than 10 people connected to Lisanne Freund and Chris Kramers have all died in suspicious circumstances, including the taxi driver who drove them to the trail that day, named Leonardo Gonzalez. He later told investigators he had seen a pickup truck close to where he dropped the 2 girls off at. He was found dead 7 months later in a river. He had been drowned. A picture later came out called the swimming picture, and it's said to have been Lisanne and Chris in the picture happy in a lake with 2 men called Osman Valenzuela and Jose Manuel Murguez, and this picture was apparently taken by the taxi driver. This picture had been found on Osman Valenzuela's phone and may have been taken on the 1st of April or a few days before they went missing. Osman also took part in the searches for Chris and Lisanne. 3 days after Chris and Lisanne disappeared, Osman Valenzuela went missing. He was later found drowned in a river, but on examination no water was found in his lungs and his body had been found in an unnatural position in the river. Jose Manuel Murguez, the second man in the swimming picture, was killed a year later in a hit and run. After a somewhat strange, careful examination of all the evidence and findings, authorities deemed it more likely that the girls had not been murdered but instead, accidentally fell off of a cliff. Number 1. Rebecca Zahau. Rebecca Zahau was a woman of Burmese origin who lived in a mansion with her boyfriend, who was the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, Jonah Shaknai. She and Jonah began dating in 2008, and Jonah was labeled as the 9th highest paid CEO in Arizona. Jonah had a son named Max Shaknai with his second wife, Dina Romano. On the 11th of July 2011, Rebecca, 6-year-old Max and Rebecca's teenage sister Zena were at the Spreckles mansion in Coronado in California. At some point, Max fell over the second-floor banister and landed face-first onto the ground floor. This left his spinal cord and facial bones severely injured and neck broken, affecting his heart rate and breathing. Rebecca found him within minutes and Zena called 911, but Max was unresponsive and not breathing, but it's believed that Rebecca managed to resuscitate Max, but he was still unresponsive. He was transported to the Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego. He was examined at some point in the hospital, and the examiner told police that Max's injuries were not consistent with a fall, as he had brain swelling and a cardiac arrest, and suggested this may have been from being suffocated. Jonah and Dina, the parents of Max, stayed by Max's hospital bed in the following days to watch over him. The day after the fall, on the 12th of July, Rebecca dropped off her sister, Zena, at the airport. Then she went and picked up Jonah's brother, Adam, and Adam and Jonah then ate dinner with a friend of theirs that evening at a restaurant. After dinner, Jonah went back to the hospital to sit with Max, and Rebecca and Adam returned to the Spreckles mansion. That night, it was reported by neighbors they could hear loud music coming from their mansion. The next morning, on the 13th of July, Adam left the guest house at the mansion around 6:30 a.m. and called 911, telling them he had just found Rebecca naked and hanging from a balcony at the front of the mansion, with her hands tied behind her back and ankles tied. Adam then sent a text to Jonah to let him know what had just happened, and Adam then cut Rebecca down and began doing chest compressions before police arrived. Early on, police suspected foul play, but when analyzing the scene, investigators only found Rebecca's DNA at the scene, and they ended up ruling her death a suicide on the 2nd of September. When her body went for an autopsy, it showed there were 4 areas of her head that had head trauma on. 3 days later, Max Shacknife passed away in the hospital from his injuries. Strange details were noticed on examination of Rebecca's death that leaves people unsure of if her death was a suicide or a murder. A T-shirt was found wrapped around her neck and gagging her mouth, and written on the door in black paint was the words, "She saved him, can you save her?" The other end of the red rope she had used to hang herself with was tied to the bed, and the other part led out onto the balcony where her footprints were found, and it's claimed there was a man's boot print there. On her bookshelf was a book titled Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, and inside her were illustrations of a naked woman with her hands bound behind her back, instructing that red cord should be used, the same color as the rope Rebecca was found with. A neighbor came forward to say she had heard screams and yelling "help, help" that night, and another witness came out to say that he had seen a woman, who looked like Dina Romano, the mother of Max, walking towards the front door of the mansion that night. Adam was given a lie detector test the next day, but the results were inconclusive. At the scene, 2 knives were found, and one of the knives had Rebecca's menstrual blood on all 4 sides of the knife handles, and menstrual blood was smeared onto one of her inner thighs. Rebecca also had bruising on her scalp and had tape residue on her legs. Her autopsy showed that Rebecca had died around 3 a.m. and there was no evidence of a sexual assault found. All of the DNA on the ropes and DNA from the message written on the wall belonged to Rebecca, and the tub of paint used to write the message was found in the room, and Rebecca's thumbprint was found on the cap, although that same black paint was found on her breasts, but none of the black paint was found on the palms of her hands, and no paint was found on her fingertips either. Since then, Rebecca's family have sued Adam Shacknife, and they are still looking for answers for the death of Rebecca Sahau.